hopefully enjoying the film. Take it very, very lucky. 3 of my heroes from many, many years are on stage with me. Never thought I would ever be sitting in the same couple of square metres, to be honest. We have the Masters, Robert Allsopp. We have Stephen Mansfield, and we have Mike Tucker. And we're going to talk a little bit. Can we have the house lights off? Would that be all right? Sorry, just to... and we're going to talk a little bit about their work. Probably a lot on Doctor Who, let's be honest. To be fair. Turn those, right? Oh, that's it. Perfect. Okay. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and then I'm going to open it to the floor. Okay, so anything relevant you think would be great. Okay, so I think I'll start with nice and easy, folks. What was your first effect for Doctor Who? What was your, if I can go around, what was your very first experience for Doctor Who?
Well, first thing I did, I was working for another prop maker called Martin Adams, who had a history of making props and costumes for the show anyway. He'd made the Melker statue from Keeper of Traken, amongst other things. And he was asked to, his workshop was asked to come up with a question mark shaped umbrella handle, and he gave me that job to do. So my first bit of real Doctor Who was making Sylvester's umbrella handle.
First, the what?
Top that, please.
I'm not likely to, probably. First thing Susan and I did was one of the more senior and expert sculptors at the BBC effects department at that time, a guy called Stan Mitchell. He had been working on these tetrap things, didn't know what they were at the time, and he was famous for never going on holiday and never taking a break or anything until he did, which he did in the middle of this show. He got the opportunity of a skiing holiday and took it up. And he very kindly recommended Susan and I to carry on with what he was working on, which were these tetraps. So we worked on the heads and then sculpted some small ones that were in a model shot, like a false perspective thing. So it looked like they were in a cave or something. But yeah, that was the first thing we did, and it just kind of went from there.
When those little tetraps turned up at the effects department, they were described as the best soap on a rope we'd ever seen. I apologise that I'm 2 octaves lower than I normally am, but my throat has gone today. So when I joined the BBC, Doctor Who had been taken off the air. It was during the hiatus, which is a word that's only ever used with Doctor Who being off the air. And I'd worked on a variety of different things, and then eventually I was about to go back to college. I'd been on a secondment. And the manager said, "What haven't you worked on yet that you would like to?" And I spotted at this point that Doctor Who was coming back, and I just sort of I've never done some science fiction. It'd be nice to do some of that. And he went, "Oh, well, Doctor Who's coming back next month. Off you go." I'll introduce you to Mike Kelt, the designer. And Mike went, "Yeah, we can give you a couple of weeks' work. Build the TARDIS for the opening shot of Trial of a Time Lord."
That's pretty good. So that's getting there.
That's my first job, is building the 2 police box miniatures, one of which is in that big opening sequence.
What I'm going to do now is just quickly chip in before I go out. I'm going to a couple of questions, then I'll start chipping in. But I thought I'd try and reference a few of the sort of monster makers of ye old, and just in a sentence kind of thing, what do you think? So if I said Willis O'Brien, what would you say? It's not a test. If you really have never ever experienced these people, then just tell me to go away. But Willis O'Brien, did you look at his work? How do you consider it?
Well, he was more stop frame animation, wasn't he?
Yeah. King Kong.
So yes, I certainly would have been aware of that, and certainly some of the first films I saw were Ray Harryhausen films, so also in that kind of similar genre. Yeah.
Just taking another question off me, but that's okay. That's all right. Ray Harry. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, Willis O'Brien. I mean, I loved the original version of King Kong, and persuaded my parents when it was on TV once to let me sit and watch it. I think I must have been 6 or 7, and at the end of it, my mum just came in and said, "How did you enjoy it?" And apparently, I was just in floods of tears and just going, "Why couldn't they let him live in the jungle?"
that's a very fair point, isn't it?
So Willis O'Brien, I mean, definitely, created a character that you empathised with. That was his key thing. It's not just a stop-motion model, it was a character.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And it's amazing how much emotion that character gives off, isn't it? Even though you know it's small, and when with modern eyes it looks, a little shaky around the edges and so on. But it must have been absolutely mind-boggling for people at the time, and it's a wonderful thing. I genuinely feel that if it's a good story and good characters, and it's it almost doesn't matter how shaky or however something appears. It's everything else around it, and that really is brilliant. It's super.
So, just going back to Doctor Who, what would you say? I'm not going to mention the Candyman. It's up to you. What do you think was the biggest challenge you faced on Doctor Who? Because it's nature, it literally will throw anything at you. You're going to have such a crazy. The brief could be incredible, couldn't it? I mean, whatever. What, from your experience, do you think was the one that you really fought with? It may be the Candyman, I don't know. What was the one?
Probably the thing with Doctor Who, people say it's time and money. Well, usually it's more to do with the time than the money, to be honest. And so probably my biggest challenge was trying to recreate the look of the original Sea Devils in about a week. And for various reasons, there was just a tiny amount of time to create the head sculpt, mould it, and get one on set for camera testing. So that was probably my biggest challenge.
I think for Susan and I would have been the melting face that we did for a story in the first set of stories we did. It was an effect, so we would normally have done masks and things. It was slightly different for us. But knowing that, the worst thing you can do, which you guys probably remember, especially you, Michael, is to hold up any time in the studio. We made 2 of them so that we thought, well, at least if one doesn't work, the other one hopefully will. It was a complicated enough thing to make, and it was a complicated thing to set up. And we'd all thought about it carefully. Susan and I had, and we discussed it with Mike and the designers and so on. And it did just work as sweet as a nut, didn't it? And it was pushed right to the end of the day, which all of this stuff always is, because those sort of effects, they're nice to have, but they don't forward the story anything or in any way. He could have died, they could have whited it out or whatever. And we were literally about to go home. It was about 10:15, and the designer had said, you may as well go home, they're not going to do it. And so we packed it up, or started packing it up, and then he came over and said, no, quick, unpack it, they're going to do it. And we raced on. And it just went sweet as a nut, didn't it? Everybody piled in, and we had hot air burners just outside the scope of the camera, and you were holding one, weren't you, to remember, in Rocky? And yeah, it really did go beautifully, and it could have gone horribly wrong, because it was complicated, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think just following on from that, I mean, what was one of the both blessings and curse of the effects department was that producers and directors would sit down in front of you and go, we want it to be like that effect from Raiders of the Lost Ark, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, with no concept, time, money, and that was exactly what the Dragonfire melting face was. They'd seen this beautiful effect from Raiders, which was Chris Wallace and layers of gelatin that were melted, and they went, you can do that, can't you? And Stephen's right, it gets left till 9:45, because that way all your actors are wrapped, they're the important talent, so they go, right, let's do the effects work. And you've got 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And what was frustrating is that the melting of Kane was actually a 2-part effect. There was the close-up of the face, and there was meant to be a melting body. And Andy McVeigh, in his wisdom, decided that going down to a local adult store and buying an inflatable figure, suspending it from a ceiling hoist, would allow us to release the air from the doll, lower the ceiling hoist, and it would look like the figure was collapsing into the floor. Well, the instruction to the guy operating the ceiling hoist didn't get given, so the figure deflated and the trousers fell off. But again, I'll go back to what Stephen was saying. You don't sit there and go, don't be ridiculous. That's a multi-million-pound film that we're trying to match. You go, yeah, all right then. What, 10 minutes and 40 quid? Yeah, okay. And
To be fair, it was £45.
45 quid, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to throw a wild card in here. Please, this is not a test, so if you've never seen anything with this person's work, just skip it. It's fine. But one of those monster makers that I personally have looked at and I think, what do I actually think of? Paul Blaisdell. Do you know what I mean? No? He did things like the She Creature. Do you remember those 50s films? Sorry, this is me super nerding here. Okay? No, it's okay. It's okay. I'm going to pass it. I'm going to move on. I'll show you some pictures tonight, though. Oh, yes. Anyway, okay, going on. We discussed it. Wah Chang. Do you know Wah Chang's work? And what do we think? Has that had any impact upon you?
He was very much a key figure in the props and costumes for the original Star Trek series. I think he did certainly the Salt Vampire. I think he may well have made the communicators and phasers as well. Thank you. And the tricorders, I believe. He may have done the Gorn. I'm not 100% sure on if he did that one. I suspect he probably did. But he was a very clever prop maker I think he started out making reference models for Bambi for Disney, making a little jointed figure so that would be a reference for the animators. But yes, very, very clever man, yeah.
No, I've no idea. See.
Oh, well, the one for me, and it's another childhood thing, is that he did the Morlocks from the George Pell Time Machine. And there's a scene where one of the Morlocks gets knocked over and I think cracks his head against a rock, and this black blood comes out of the mask. And it absolutely terrified me as a child. Something about those Morlock faces that is really, really disturbing in the same way that the Salt Vampire from Star Trek is. Mm.
For my money, he did The Outer Limits, season 1 particularly. He did a lot of them. Anybody here, my second favourite show is Outer Limits, the original 60s, and he did, I think, for the early, it was 63, wasn't it? Some of the best monsters of the time for the 60s were really cool.
Did he do Five Faces of Dr. Lau as well?
I think he did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Possibly the Pillsbury Doughboy as well.
So moving on. Just to be clear, last night we're having a nice meal and Rob threw a few little things out which made us gasp. One was that he was involved in the production of the recent musical adaptation of Cats, which Debbie, who was at the table, screamed because she loves musicals. And then also he announced that he'd had a cheese flan with Kate Bush the other day, which was also equally meal-stopping in its... anyway, the next question, I would say, is, just go early on then, what made you get into effects? What was it that inspired you? Did you know you always wanted to get into this field? And what led you to Doctor Who? Was it accidental, or were you fans that you got in? Was there episodes that you liked? What was it that really inspired you?
Well, I kind of don't know how to do anything else. That's one factor. I'd always made stuff as a kid, and I'd always wanted to make rubber masks, like the kind of thing I'd seen in Doctor Who. And I remember when I was about 13 or so, I actually wrote to Dunlop to try and find out where to get latex rubber from, and they kindly sent me a letter with the supplier, and so I started teaching myself to make sculpts and plaster moulds and latex masks, and with the ultimate aim, I suppose, of working on Doctor Who, ideally.
With me, I would say, when I was growing up, I enjoyed watching the older Doctor Who's. I knew they were made in England or Britain, or I had no idea they were actually in London somewhere. And I thought, well, it's attainable. Somebody has to do this. And it's quite funny because the Sea Devils, interesting, I mean, they're my favourite of the old sort of monsters. And I can remember making a cardboard one, somehow, I don't know how, a little cardboard one when I was smaller. And it's that early, I was describing to someone earlier today, you kind of have this kind of confidence. You just think, right, well, I'm sure I can make something like this. And you start messing with clay, and you start messing with plaster, and you learn about rubber and all this kind of thing. And do you remember this? When Robert year before last or whatever it is, was about to do these new ones, he telephoned me and said, I've got this really terrible rush job. Would you be interested in doing this? And I absolutely couldn't, because I was doing some spitting image stuff as it happened. I was still doing my day job as well. And I just thought if little, like, 11-year-old me could see 50-year-old or 59-year-old me turning that down, he'd have been furious. He'd have been kicking me, out the backside, saying, "No, you must do it, you fool," And I couldn't, could I?
No, sadly.
It's a shame.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as I got that job, it was like, crikey, I need to get these right. And Stephen's the best sculptor I know by far, so I was immediately on the phone to him, and when he wasn't available, I thought, oh, well, best do it myself then. So thankfully it all worked out all right, I think.
Great. They are good. I think they're super. They're lovely.
I mean, even Hal Townsend didn't mess anything up when he helped you with those, did he? Did Hal work on those? Where is he? He's gone. Did you paint one of those?
What?
The Sea Devils. Did you have anything to do with the Sea Devils, man?
Yeah.
What did you do?
You came and helped, didn't you?
Yeah, a little bit of sculpting.
So I was just going to say, even Hal didn't, because it's dangerous getting Hal involved, honestly, yeah. Sorry, Mike. What was your... Because we were talking about things like British comics and all sorts. What were your influences that led you...
I mean, I grew up to Airfix kits, Lego, Meccano, all that sort of stuff, and less so the sculpting work than the sort of building of spacecraft and things. And I wanted to get into museum model making. So the Natural History Museum had these beautiful forced perspective dioramas, and I thought, well, that'll be good. And then I saw Bernard Wilkie being interviewed about the work that they were doing at the BBC Special Effects Department, and much like you, it's like, oh, so there's actually a department that does this stuff. That must be attainable. Tried to get my careers teacher at school to, engage with it, and they were like, don't be silly. And then we just discovered that the head of BBC Wales Drama lived about 6 doors down from us in Swansea. And he said, well, I know the head of the BBC Special Effects Department, do you want to visit? So I went and visited Michael John Harris and took along one of my model spacecraft, which he was polite about. And they just gave me a lot of very, very good careers advice. Go and get a founding in as many different practical skills as you possibly can. Sculpting, mould making, polystyrene work, woodwork, costume work, a bit of makeup, learn how to light things. So I grabbed my dad's Super 8 camera and started making my own little films and learning the craft that way. And then did the courses that they'd advised me to do. And I joined the BBC, I was 20 years old, straight out of college, and straight in there, and it was a fantastic training ground.
So I'm almost tempted to say, because what you may or may not know out there is that you two... I was watching an episode of The Young Ones the other night, that serious drama series, and it reminded me last night in the pub, because you two shared a student house. And then you two, yes. Sorry, that's right. And it was just sort of that I had visions of The Young Ones with sort of like, this sort of crazy house with all these things going on. And you were all three contemporaries, really. And how did you sort of impact on each other? How did you start to sort of, obviously, in terms of your work, did you sort of bounce ideas off each other, problem solve together, or was it, because that's quite interesting.
Mike and I were in the same year at college on the same course. Yeah. And I suppose initially there was a bit of sort of friendly competition between us, and quite often Mike would get the top mark on a project. Quite often, possibly less often, I'd get the top mark on a project. And so there was a bit of friendly competition going on, but nothing too serious. And then, but I think...
But you knew Sue more than Steve.
I knew Sue, and I met Stephen through Sue. Yes, so Susan Moore was my sort of connection to the industry because I knew she'd worked on Hitchhiker and made the Babel Fish and that kind of thing. I don't think she'd done any Doctor Who at that point. I think that kind of happened for all of us around the same time, really, and also for a friend of ours, Mark Ayres, doing the music as well. So there was this whole little group of mates who all managed to get on the show at the same time, really.
And Susan knew Mark Platt as well. So, as Robert says, there was a whole little gang of us, really, and all working, and obviously not all doing the same thing. And Ian Briggs was, a great fun sort of character. Everybody seemed young, at the same time. It was a great sort of period, actually. And now I think about it, the number of people who did know each other, just, I don't know, socially or what have you, was extraordinary, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, and we were very lucky in that John Nathan Turner, for all his, foibles, was very generous in allowing all these 20-year-olds who are coming into the business, okay, let's give them free rein and see what they can do. And that wasn't just us in the effects department. That was, Andrew Cartmel as script editor. That was people like Ian Briggs and Ben Aronovich as writers. He really was going, okay, they all seem to get on well. They all seem to know what they're doing. And most importantly, he said to me, it's become obvious to me that you're a fan of Doctor Who. He said, but you're not letting it get in the way of your job. And that to him was a big thing. It's like he knew that we knew John Pertwee and Tom Baker, that we'd all watched this stuff, but he didn't think it would actually matter. He knew he could trust us.
It's also, I was thinking, there were a lot of people who loved the show, and there was a kind of tipping point where that actually was a bit of an advantage. I think he could see if you appeared to like the programme, that wasn't necessarily a bad thing, that actually it worked quite well because you would probably give it a little bit more than perhaps someone who wasn't that bothered so much about it. It was an interesting period because at that point, I think John had been doing it for so long, and certainly hadn't run out of steam or anything. But you had a lot of younger people. You had Andrew Cartmel with this great new, direction, and then right at the top, someone so experienced, so knew exactly how to facilitate everything, and really started working beautifully well. Really good.
Just as they cancelled it.
Just as they cancelled it, yeah, unfortunately, but yeah.
I always think there was a rejuvenation, I think, in effect. And not that it was bad before that, but there was definitely a rejuvenation. It felt like in the visual and the quality of what was visually presented in that point. I've always thought that. And I always like the Three Musketeers, sort of like you were at the forefront of giving it a kick up the bum in a way.
Well, I mean, I can only speak for, say, myself and Susan. You get a wonderful opportunity, as we all were. I know I keep banging on about we were young, but we were only like in our early 20s, really. And you were given a lot of freedom to design things. I mean, I can't imagine what it must be like working on the programme now. But then, something like The Destroyer or something, I just made up, and they let you do it, and they just sort of said, well, actually, that's great, we'll go with that, and they trusted you to do it. And rather like I was saying to you yesterday, it was an interesting period because every story had a different production team, so the feel of them were all slightly different, and there was a terrific variety of looks and a general feel across each of them, and and it really seemed to work well. But it was a magical time, really. I think
I was chatting about this with Stephen last night. I think there's a certain amount as well of the naivety of youth, that you go into this as a 20-year-old going, I think the Doctor Who monsters, from last year were crap. We can do so much better than that. So you launch yourself into this without the slightest inkling of what budget constraints or time constraints, or indeed your own knowledge constraints, were going to put into you. And I remember doing Dragonfire. It was like, we're going to do this model shot of a spacecraft taking off, And I was in my head, this is going to be the best model shot ever. I'd never done this sort of thing before professionally. So I'm up 30 foot in the air on a cherry picker with a model spacecraft packed with batteries on the end of, I don't know, 30-pound fishing line. Instead of doing it the way I should have done it, on steel wire, because the steel wire doesn't stretch, but of course fishing line stretches. So I'm there up this thing, trying to lift this model, and all that's happening is that the wires are stretching and stretching and stretching and stretching, and suddenly this thing just goes boing off the surface, and it looked awful. And of course the cameraman goes, right, got that, moving on. And it's like, no, this model shot that I've decided is going to be the best thing I've ever done is going to look utter shit. And it did. The following year, you've learned, so you'd never do that sort of rookie mistake again. But you don't think, oh, maybe these old lags who are in the department have been there for 30 years might actually know how to pass on some of that knowledge. And they were very generous. Stan was very good at passing on knowledge. I think everyone collaborated incredibly well. But it did take a while to learn that you didn't know everything.
Yes, yeah. Just very before, I'm going to ask the audience this next question, I think. But before that, I'm pointing down here my favourite monster of all time in Doctor Who, which is surprising to some people, but is Field Major Steyer. Not just any Sontaran, Steyer. I love Steyer. Lynx is damn good, but and so that brings me to the question. Beautifully done, Phil. Gorgeous, and Hal did that, didn't it? Lovely mass. But basically, John Friedlander, who is one of my, growing up, was a name that I probably said every day, because I'm looking in the Doctor Who Monster book and all that. What do you think of, how do you rate what he did? Just to, on, you know, what was his impact on you? Or
well, his impact is huge. I mean, he really was probably the very best, and his imagination and his whole artistic approach to everything he did was wonderful. I mean, I can remember seeing a picture of him in the back of a magazine. I think it might have been a Radio Times thing, a 10th anniversary thing. And if I remember correctly, in fact, it wasn't this photo, but it was another photo, I think, from the same time, where he's got a mould and he's pouring the latex out and he's got a pipe on the go, and it looks so, it was just a whole other era, you know, and he looked very confident, very, you know, and I thought, gosh, that's the sort of job you want to do. Not that I smoke a pipe, but I just love the idea that it all looked very relaxed and he kind of made it feel effortless, and his imagination was extraordinary. I mean, I often think about his Davros, you know, it's not done over a face cast of anybody. I think it's done over a bust of Dave Allen, isn't it, or something weird like that. And so the fact that it fits so beautifully, and it moves, and it's got all this character, and he gives it this huge head for no skull, for no particular reason, but it's brilliant, and it just looks good. I love the imagination of a lot of the more traditional monster makers, because they were slightly more theatrical, and they weren't kind of hampered by a bit like, I suppose, we would have been sort of post-Star Wars stuff, which was all a bit more po-faced and so on. I love the imagination of some of those older guys.
That Sontaran, just when it takes its helmet off, the shape of the head, I still think, even now, is a reveal. When you watch it, it still holds up. It's still...
But it was a kind of gag, wasn't it? Someone had said, I think one of the producers or something, said, the writer, wouldn't it be funny if he has a shape of helmet, and then when he takes his helmet off, his head's the same shape? Ha ha. You know, that's it. And that's kind of where they come from. And the idea that it's just such a clever idea, and he realised them beautifully well. I think he was a clever technician as well. I'm going to hand it on, so I could talk about him for hours. But, yeah.
Likewise, John Friedlander was a huge influence on me. Like Stephen, I saw the photo in the back of the 10th anniversary special of him holding a draconian mask, and that made quite an impact, so, along with the little article about how he made it. His creatures were all brilliantly executed, and he was a proper classically trained sculptor. he knew all the correct ways to measure a face and a head, and I think there was some connection between his training and the guy who taught Rodin sculpture, actually. And I was very fortunate. I got to spend an afternoon with him when I was in my 20s, and he was really helpful and recommended the books on sculpture that would be most useful to read. And so as well as being a brilliant artist, sculptor and technician, he was a really nice, friendly guy as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to reiterate everything the guys have said. I mean, there's something wonderfully organic about Friedlander's designs. There's a simplicity about them. There's a boldness to the sculpture. The Sea Devils are a case in point. They're very broadly blocked out, but they work instantly well. And he didn't fuss about, do the eyes blink, do the mouth work? It didn't matter. We're just going to make it look good, and you'll do all the work of making it feel like a real creature. You can get potentially not too bogged down with the realism of it. As you say, there's a theatricality to Doctor Who monsters from the 70s that works instantly.
They still sustain, don't they? They still hold up.